one of these days I'm gonna figure out how to have some intro music and some video. I'm not that guy yet, but welcome back to another episode. It's 10 days, 10 days since the Kirk assassination. That's all it's been. A little bit more than a week, and America already feels like it's teetering on the edge of something bigger. You have liberal voices being silenced a lot like they were under the Biden administration with conservative voices. But this feels different. The country's more on an edge. There's a script involved here, I think, and Charlie Kirk's just one of the acts. The headlines are blurred, and pundits rehearse their outrage, and the people, us, we're left wondering if we just witnessed a crime or the first move of a long planned operation. Our government has done things like this before with JFK assassination, MLK assassination. And who knows how many people they had regime changes overseas with Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein with false flags and stuff and lies that they've spoken and they told us and we bought into it, hook, line, and sinker, being the gullible fish that we are. But the Charlie Kirk assassination, it's an assassination. That's the only way you could say it. It was intentional. It has to be an operation. Assassinations don't happen in a vacuum. They're not random. They're signals. And this one, it's not about Kirk alone. It's about testing the system and shaping the reactions that they're going to have for the next act or the next thing that they have. And they always use the same script. If we go back and think, it's always the same script. Step one, shock the nation. With Hillary Clinton once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Step two, you split the tribes. We've already been divided. We've been divided since Barack Obama's first term, when he said he was going to fundamentally change America at its core. And he did a really good job at that. But we were being split before then, but just nothing is as bad as it is right now. Not only with political, but racial and socioeconomical lines. The haves and the have-nots, the rich and the needy. They've got us split and divided multiple ways. Excuse me. And then step three, we saw this after 9/11. It's demand of safety, and it's funny that they say it's safety, but it always looks like control, suspiciously like control with the Patriot Act. That's what happened when they said, "Hey, we're just going to do this temporary thing called the Patriot Act." I did a podcast on that, and the Patriot Act is temporary. They come up and they just keep voting it back into place. History doesn't whisper here; it screams. In 1933, you had Reichstag burned, and Hitler didn't just mourn; he moved. Emergency decrees, civil liberties slashed, power consolidated, crisis, as a ladder, fear as a fuel. That's the song. Same song, just different band. Then you fast forward to 9/11. The towers fall, and within weeks we had the Patriot Act, expanded surveillance, and an executive branch that could spy and detain and wage war with the fear of a hand that never we've seen before. Did people demand it? No, but we accepted it. We the population we were scared. We never had anything like that on our soil, and it scared people. Well, let me rephrase. We had things like that. They were just never sensationalized. There's always been acts of terrorism on U.S. soil. The underground the Weather Underground, whatever, with Bill Ayers' group. They let a bomb off in Congress. They got a slap on the wrist. And then you had the CIA using Timothy McVeigh to blow up the Oklahoma FBI building. But you know, fear's a bargaining chip, and liberty always sells cheap when you're panicked. You know, with us being scared. Well, yeah, just protect us. Just protect us. It's not the government's duty to protect us. It's our duty as Americans, as taxpayers, to to have our liberties and freedoms and not trade those in for anything. So fast forward from 9/11 to 2020. And it's the biggest stress test for societal compliance in modern history. That was the lockdowns, mandates, and curfews, the digital tracking. Businesses shuttered by decree, churches were chained, had the doors chained, and you had big box stores that stayed open. You know, that didn't set right with millions of people. The entire population was trained for permission slips to breathe, gather, or work again. And that didn't set right with a lot of us. But you know what we did? We accepted it. The pandemic was real. I know that for a fact. I laid up in the hospital on a ventilator for 12 days. But what it did prove how fast a behavior could be rewired for the right cocktail of fear. And authority was mixed. And it just wasn't about health. It was about obedience. That's what it was always about, obedience. The government learned the lever. Tech companies, they became enforcers. Doctors lost their jobs. People lost their platforms because they spoke truth and their opinion on this on the pandemic, on COVID-19. And then you had neighbors turning each other in. Hey, Greg's out here mowing his yard without a mask on. You know, everybody wanted to be a hero, I guess. I don't know. You had that school teacher walking around here challenging people in Food City and stuff if they didn't have a mask on, the proper type of mask. That dude from Central, you know, and he would get agitated and get in their face and stuff. We just complied. You know, some of us protested, yeah, but you know, the majority obeyed, and that obedience didn't fade. It set as a precedence. The rehearsal that was the rehearsal, and that part they'll use it again. So they used the assassination of Charlie Kirk as the catalyst. One bullet, one funeral, and suddenly the entire spectrum, left and right, is dancing to predictable beats. The left points out the dangers of radicalism, and you know the right does the same. And they call for tighter speech controls on both sides. You know, what we've seen here though is how sick individuals. And I'm sure there's people like that on the right, but how sick these individuals are on the left, where they're talking about, you know, did you see how Kirk got killed and how all that came out, all that ridiculous stuff. No humanity left. And, and then, you know, Trump came in and said, oh, you know what? You can't say that stuff. You can't say that stuff. You have to be respectful. I get what he's saying, but, you know, Ohio versus Brandenburg. Hate speech is free speech. Do I agree with what they said? No. And there is consequences. No one's charging them with any federal offenses of freedom of speech, you know, of violating constitutional rights. But companies are saying, you know what, that's over the top. That's over the top, and you can't say that because you represent the company that you work for, whether you're a school teacher, a police officer, a fireman, or you a nurse, a doctor. It doesn't matter. You represent the company you work for. And if you're in one of these positions, like in the military, and you say something about Trump or about Charlie Kirk or whatever, you have a moral and ethical code that you have to follow, and it's within their rights. It's within their rights when you sign that contract to discipline you. In most companies now, the company I work for has a very strict um, social media policy that we have to abide by. Very strict. The CEO already came out and said, don't say any of that bullshit. Don't say any of that disgusting bullshit that all these people that are on TikTok and all this making. And it's good for him. Good for him. You got doctors running around here saying that shit. I overheard nurses. Overheard nurses over talking about it. And I walked up on them, they got silent real quick. But am I going to go snitch them out? No, because I can't verify what they were saying. Would I? I don't know. Probably not. But I would have, if they said something off color in front of me, I would have said something. I would have, that's one thing that you and I both know. I don't have a filter. And everybody needs to hear the truth, whether they like it or not. That's one reason why I have this podcast, so I can get out here and I can speak the truth to people in masses, all 17 or 18 of you. But I can speak the truth to people, and it doesn't eat me up. Huh. Back off. So each side's furious. You know, you had some dude run through and he yelled "F Charlie Kirk" in the middle of a vigil, and a bunch of dudes jumped him and beat the brakes off of him, which is fine. Consequences. Freedom of speech has consequences. You can say what you want, but don't be surprised if someone knocks your teeth out your mouth. Don't be surprised if somebody puts a boot on your neck. The machine doesn't care which way you vote. It doesn't care who wins the argument. It only cares about the tribes that accept more control, more surveillance, and more temporary measures that never expire. So who's to blame? It's kind of fog. Who pulled the trigger? Everybody's saying that it's that Robertson kid or whatever his name was, that dope, that tranny 11 dope. No one knows. It doesn't matter. Not to them. Not to the people that control us. Not to the Larry Finks and the Bill Gates and the Bob Ackmans and the Barack Obamas and the Hillary Clinton. All the people that's in charge. All the people that's pulling the strings. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter who pulled the trigger as long as it got done. What matters is that nobody can prove it fast enough. The vacuum of clarity is gold. It's the fog where suspicion festers, and the public begs for answers. And that's exactly what we're doing now. We're begging for answers. You can't get on social media without seeing 14 different camera angles and different shots. Apparently, Charlie Kirk got shot 6 times from different angles. There's always conspiracies. There are. But nothing sets right in this. Nothing set right from the beginning. An untrained kid, 200 yards away, with a rifle. That they said he broke it down on the rooftop. Didn't have time to break it down. Then they said it was in the bag. It doesn't fit in the bag that he had. And then he took time off to put it back together, wrap it in a towel, leave it in the woods. See, that's the kind of BS that none of us believe. If you don't know, say you don't know. But what you do is they're sowing seeds of discontent and mistrust within the system. So we don't know who to trust. At one time, you could trust the FBI to do the right thing. Then you had Ruby Ridge in Waco with the ATF. And then we find out that they were using the FISA court to get wiretaps illegally on Donald Trump, on the sitting president, the people's choice. Now, who do you trust? You can't trust the clandestines, the NSA and CIAs. You can't trust those. That's what they do. They go in and they topple governments. So the fog is a breeding ground for false flags, half truths, and manipulated narratives, and we're seeing all that. They don't need to blame anyone to believe the story. You just everyone needs to be divided and be angry. That's a pattern. Keep them divided and keep them angry. That's why you have all these liberals on the left in mainstream media, trying to normalize what this kid did, trying to say what Charlie Kirk was about was evil. He was racist, bigoted, a fascist. Look, I listened to a lot of Charlie Kirk ever since he was a young man 10 years ago. Well, listen to him. What he was about was Christian values and about being honest with people, and people didn't like hearing that stuff, so they called him a racist. They called him a fascist. That's what everybody. That's what anybody on the left says. If they can't win their argument, they call you name calling. And then after that, Charlie Kirk said, "Well, where's your receipts? When did I say this?" They couldn't do it. So what do? They resort to violence. That's what they are. That's who they are. So one of the final stages of this, and I've said this before, it's civil war. And this is where it gets darker. The same people who fuel these divides, they want the escalation. Sex and violence. That makes good TV. CNN, you don't think with the way they're hemorrhaging money, they don't want something like this that they can cover? The fractured America is a palatable America. You push us into street level violence and you push us into the Civil War theater. The sovereignty of the nation is done. I, look. Some men oppose violence. I'm not one of those men. I'm not. It, a, a mouthful of fists sometimes will settle a lot of shit. But in a scale like this, where we're arming ourselves and taking to the streets and burning the village down and plundering and pillaging liberal cities, and then doing the same for America. Yeah, that's third world shit. That's the shit they do over in Africa and down in South America. And then that fractures off. You have a bunch of states in southern states, and you have all the. Well, we can't do that. We can't be like that. We need to keep our wits about us. Well, once we tear ourselves apart, the door's going to swing wide open for international partners, global solutions, UN and the World Economic Forum, all the flipping Larry Finks and all those guys are going to come in with a new idea of America. And they're going to say, "Hey, it didn't work in the 1800s with the Civil War, and it don't work now. It's failed twice, so we got a new system to come in. It's a globalist system. It's a globalist socialist system where there's only a few of us have stuff, but then the rest of y'all are going to be fending for yourselves. You're going to be struggling because if you're struggling, you don't realize how bad you have it, and you have to." And have the chance to rise up and take control. When you're struggling and worry about feeding your kids and where you're going to next check. And on top of that, they're going to bring in digital currency. That way they can keep you under their thumb. If they don't like what you say or what you buy, they close your bank down. They close your account off. Then how are you going to feed your kids? If you don't take this vaccine, you're not going to be able to feed your kids. And what are we going to do? We're going to comply because I can't stand and watch my kids suffer. I don't want to watch them suffer. My kid might need medication. Well, the way you voted says that you don't really need that medication because you're an anti-government, you're an anti-policy, you're just a rebel. And we're afraid you're indoctrinating your kids in the same way. Well, you're damn right I am. I'm raising my kids to be critical thinkers. I'm raising my kids to want freedom, to want liberty. I raise my kids to question stuff. And you should do the same. If you're not, you're failing your kids. Look, the New World Order, everybody's always talked about that. And that's the New World Order in practice. Not a shadowy hand in a smoky room, but it's a set of institutions and corporations and governments that seize more power in active crisis. They always sell the same shit. Security for freedom. Order for sovereignty. And that's the hypocrisy of it. The cartoonish politicians, they all rail about liberty. And the first thing is they'll sign that shit away. They'll sign your liberty away. They'll sign mine away. If it keeps them and gives them the benefits of power. Pundits worship sovereignty until the global coordination. And when that means silencing their enemies, they're all for it. Both sides trade freedom for control. They sell you lies, they sell me lies. And they tell you it's temporary. Here's a spoiler: it never is. It's never temporary. 10 days after Kirk, that's where we're standing. We're standing on the next act of this theater that they call freedom and liberty and government. The test rate of 2020 proved obedience. Assassination, proved that we're divided. The next step is escalation, and we're already seeing it. Here's the truth of it, though. It only works if the audience in this theater. It only works if the audience doesn't play along. Stop applauding. Stop playing the roles that they hand you. Question scripts. Question everything. Refuse the shortcuts. If sovereignty dies, it doesn't. It's not because someone stole it in the dark. It's because we traded away in the light. We traded away for security and freedom, or security and. I'm getting agitated. And I don't want to be like that. Y'all stay loud, stay lit, keep the fight up.